September 18, 1944, 7:30 in the morning. Japanese Army Sergeant Yoshiro Nakagawa positions himself at the eastern perimeter of the prisoner of war camp near Window Rock, Arizona, observing with tactical intensity what appears to be sophisticated American cavalry reconnaissance patrol involving Native American personnel whose coordinated horseback formations and systematic movement patterns suggest advanced military scouting operations designed to gather intelligence about enemy positions while maintaining strategic surveillance of captured personnel. Nakagawa watches Navajo elder Thomas Yazi lead a group of horsemen across the desert landscape using formation patterns that appear consistent with military reconnaissance procedures designed to maximize observation capabilities while maintaining tactical flexibility for rapid deployment or strategic withdrawal when circumstances require coordinated response to enemy activities that might threaten operational security or compromise strategic objectives. The systematic nature of Native American horseback activities suggests carefully planned military exercise where participants demonstrate advanced cavalry tactics through coordinated movement that indicates professional training in mounted reconnaissance designed to enhance battlefield effectiveness while utilizing traditional horsemanship skills that appear integrated with contemporary military doctrine for strategic advantage against enemy forces. The precision that Navajo riders demonstrate in formation maintenance appears consistent with military drill designed to create automatic responses and coordinated action during reconnaissance operations while utilizing traditional horsemanship that serves tactical objectives through systematic integration of cultural heritage with contemporary warfare techniques that enhance operational effectiveness through mounted surveillance capabilities. Nakagawa cannot understand why American military leadership would permit ethnic minorities to conduct independent mounted patrols unless these activities serve specific reconnaissance purposes through systematic integration of traditional horsemanship with contemporary warfare techniques that enhance tactical intelligence gathering, while demonstrating American utilization of diverse cultural resources for strategic advantage against enemy forces, whose capabilities might be assessed through mounted observation. The enthusiastic participation of civilian Native American observers in horseback activities suggests community support for military operations that either represents unprecedented integration of ethnic populations into reconnaissance activities or sophisticated utilization of cultural traditions for strategic objectives that enhance intelligence gathering through systematic incorporation of traditional horsemanship with contemporary military surveillance techniques. The presence of traditional Native American regalia alongside apparent military formation suggests cultural integration with tactical activities, indicating military organization that combines contemporary reconnaissance requirements with traditional ceremonial elements, while maintaining ethnic identity that serves strategic purposes through systematic adherence to cultural traditions that enhance rather than compromise operational effectiveness. In captivity, every movement appears tactical. Military personnel trained in systematic observation and strategic analysis naturally interpret unfamiliar activities through framework of reconnaissance assessment that seeks to identify potential surveillance operations, patrol methods, and tactical procedures that might provide intelligence about enemy capabilities while revealing cultural practices that could serve military objectives through systematic integration of traditional methods. But sometimes, witnessing ancient traditions reveals the warrior spirit that transcends all forms of modern conflict. Sometimes, horseback activities that appear military actually represent fundamental cultural values about warrior honor, spiritual connection, and ancestral respect that exists independently of tactical objectives while demonstrating indigenous wisdom that prioritizes courage recognition over strategic preparation for violence against enemy populations whose cultural traditions emphasize different approaches to warrior identity. The prisoner of war camp near Window Rock had been established within traditional Navajo territory where indigenous horsemanship traditions emphasized spiritual connection and warrior honor that maintained cultural identity while serving community purposes rather than military objectives through systematic adherence to traditional practices that celebrated courage without requiring tactical preparation for warfare against enemy populations. Nakagawa's background included extensive Japanese military training in cavalry tactics and mounted reconnaissance that had prepared him to identify enemy patrol activities through systematic assessment of formation patterns, movement coordination, and strategic positioning while interpreting all horseback activities as potential military operations designed to enhance tactical intelligence or strategic surveillance capabilities. His capture 12 months earlier during Saipan operations had resulted from overwhelming American combined arms coordination that demonstrated advanced tactical integration while revealing American capacity for systematic utilization of diverse military resources whose effectiveness had exceeded Japanese strategic expectations through methods that challenged conventional understanding of military organization and tactical coordination. The cultural framework that prevented Nakagawa from understanding Navajo ceremonial horsemanship included Japanese military emphasis on tactical efficiency and strategic purpose, where all mounted activities served reconnaissance objectives rather than cultural preservation that existed independently of warfare, while maintaining traditional practices that emphasized spiritual rather than tactical development. Navajo horsemanship traditions reflected cultural values about warrior honor, spiritual connection, and ancestral respect that demonstrated indigenous wisdom about courage, while providing cultural framework for understanding individual responsibility within warrior identity that served cultural preservation rather than military objectives through systematic adherence to traditional practices that maintained spiritual rather than tactical heritage. The Navajo horsemen who participated in traditional ceremonies included community members whose cultural background combined ancestral warrior traditions with contemporary civilian life, creating cultural identity that maintained indigenous values while serving community purposes through systematic integration of traditional horsemanship with spiritual observance that demonstrated honor without requiring military service or tactical preparation. The systematic analysis that Nakagawa conducted of Navajo horseback activities included detailed observation of formation patterns, movement coordination, and strategic positioning that appeared consistent with cavalry reconnaissance designed to gather tactical intelligence while maintaining surveillance capabilities through traditional horsemanship that served military rather than cultural objectives requiring systematic coordination for operational effectiveness. The formation patterns that Navajo riders utilized suggested sophisticated understanding of mounted coordination through systematic use of traditional horsemanship that appeared designed to maximize reconnaissance effectiveness while maintaining tactical flexibility for rapid deployment when circumstances required coordinated response to enemy activities that might threaten strategic objectives or compromise operational security. The movement coordination that horsemen demonstrated included precise timing and systematic positioning that appeared consistent with military drill, designed to create coordinated responses during reconnaissance operations while utilizing traditional horsemanship skills that served tactical objectives through cultural methods that integrated ancestral knowledge with contemporary warfare techniques for strategic advantage. The spiritual significance that Navajo ceremonies actually represented included warrior honor, ancestral respect, and cultural preservation that served community identity rather than military preparation, while demonstrating indigenous wisdom about courage that transcended tactical objectives to emphasize spiritual connection between individual warriors and ancestral traditions that maintained cultural rather than strategic heritage. The gradual explanation that Thomas Yazzie attempted to provide about ceremonial rather than military purpose created cognitive dissonance for Japanese prisoners whose cultural background emphasized utilitarian horsemanship, where mounted activities served tactical objectives rather than spiritual development or cultural preservation that existed independently of military applications while maintaining traditional practices. The disbelief that Japanese prisoners demonstrated when learning about spiritual rather than tactical purposes reflected cultural barriers that prevented understanding of horsemanship serving warrior honor rather than reconnaissance objectives, indicating systematic worldview where all mounted activities contributed to military capabilities rather than cultural preservation that enhanced spiritual connection through traditional rather than tactical practices. The introduction to concepts of warrior honor and spiritual connection challenged Japanese military understanding of horseback activities by emphasizing cultural rather than tactical significance, demonstrating Navajo values that prioritized ancestral respect and spiritual development over reconnaissance, preparation, while maintaining traditional practices that served warrior identity rather than military objectives through systematic adherence to cultural heritage. The recognition that tradition could celebrate courage without preparing for battle represented fundamental cultural learning that challenged Japanese military assumptions about warrior activities while demonstrating Navajo values that honored courage without requiring systematic preparation for warfare or territorial conquest through military aggression that eliminated civilian populations and destroyed cultural institutions serving spiritual rather than tactical purposes. The invitation that Nakagawa eventually received to observe ceremonies closely reflected gradual understanding that horseback activities served cultural preservation rather than tactical purposes while providing spiritual education that contributed to warrior enlightenment rather than strategic intelligence gathering for military operations requiring systematic preparation for violence against enemy populations whose cultural traditions emphasized different approaches to warrior identity. The discovery of horsemanship traditions that honored rather than trained warriors challenged fundamental assumptions about mounted activities while demonstrating Navajo wisdom about courage, recognition that served cultural preservation rather than military preparation through systematic practices that enhanced spiritual welfare without requiring adherence to tactical objectives or strategic preparation for warfare against enemy forces. The cultural exchange that occurred through ceremonial observation included mutual recognition of warrior wisdom that existed independently of tactical objectives while demonstrating common human values about courage and honor that transcended national boundaries and temporary political hostilities between populations whose essential warrior spirit remained constant despite systematic warfare and cultural differences. The appreciation that Japanese prisoners developed for native warrior philosophy included understanding that horseback activities served spiritual honor rather than tactical purposes while demonstrating cultural sophistication that prioritized warrior recognition over military preparation through systematic practices that enhanced spiritual welfare without requiring strategic preparation for violence against enemy populations whose traditions emphasized different approaches. The development of respect for non-combat forms of military honor included recognition of warrior spirit that challenged tactical assumptions while demonstrating that courage achievement could transcend combat effectiveness when cultural values emphasized spiritual honor over tactical preparation through systematic adherence to traditional practices that served warrior identity rather than military objectives requiring strategic rather than spiritual development. The integration of warrior understanding into prisoner perspective included recognition that Navajo traditions offered alternatives to tactical solutions while demonstrating cultural sophistication that prioritized spiritual honor and ancestral respect over systematic preparation for violence through organized activities that served warrior development rather than military objectives requiring tactical training for warfare against enemy populations. The transformation that occurred from tactical to spiritual interpretation included fundamental reevaluation of assumptions about warrior activities, while acknowledging that courage development could transcend military preparation when cultural values emphasized spiritual honor over tactical effectiveness through systematic practices that enhanced warrior welfare without requiring temporal preparation for warfare against enemy populations whose traditions emphasized different approaches. The broader implications of understanding indigenous warrior culture included recognition that Navajo traditions offered alternatives to systematic militarism while demonstrating cultural sophistication that served spiritual honor and ancestral respect through traditional practices that prioritized warrior recognition over tactical preparation and strategic development for warfare, requiring systematic violence against civilian populations whose traditions emphasized different warrior approaches. Nakagawa's post-war testimony about Navajo warrior traditions included appreciation for ceremonial activities that demonstrated alternative approaches to warrior honor, while providing cultural education that challenged military assumptions about horseback activities serving tactical rather than spiritual objectives through systematic practices that enhanced community welfare without requiring military preparation for violence against enemy populations. The ongoing relationships that developed between former enemies through shared warrior understanding included mutual recognition of courage, wisdom that transcended military classifications, while demonstrating that authentic human connections could overcome systematic hostility when circumstances provided opportunity for cross-cultural interaction through activities that celebrated warrior honor rather than tactical preparation. The education that occurred through ceremonial participation included understanding of Navajo values that emphasized warrior honor within spiritual frameworks, while demonstrating cultural organization that prioritized ancestral respect over systematic military preparation for warfare against enemy populations, whose essential warrior spirit remained constant despite temporary political hostilities and systematic indoctrination designed to eliminate recognition of shared courage potential. The broader social implications of warrior recognition included contributions to post-war cultural exchange that emphasized shared human values about courage and honor, while demonstrating that cultural understanding could overcome systematic militarism when individual choice prioritized authentic warrior development over collective adherence to tactical objectives requiring systematic preparation for violence against populations. The documentation that emerged from prisoner ceremonial observation included testimony about Navajo cultural values that emphasized warrior honor and spiritual courage, while demonstrating indigenous wisdom about courage recognition that challenged systematic militarism designed to justify warfare against populations whose traditions prioritized spiritual development over tactical preparation for violence against enemy forces, whose essential warrior spirit transcended temporal conflicts. The psychological impact on Japanese prisoners of discovering spiritual rather than tactical purpose in Navajo horsemanship included fundamental reevaluation of cultural assumptions about warrior activities, while recognizing that courage celebration could transcend military preparation when cultural values emphasized spiritual honor over systematic tactical development that served strategic rather than spiritual objectives. In the end, the horseback formations that Japanese prisoners had interpreted as cavalry reconnaissance became evidence that Navajo culture preserved warrior traditions without requiring systematic military preparation, demonstrating indigenous values that prioritized spiritual honor and ancestral respect over tactical development and strategic preparation for warfare against enemy populations whose traditions emphasized different approaches to warrior identity and courage recognition. The transformation from tactical suspicion to spiritual appreciation illustrated that witnessing warrior traditions could reveal courage, wisdom more effectively than military analysis, proving that authentic cultural exchange through observed spiritual practices could challenge systematic militarism while demonstrating fundamental possibilities for warrior development that transcended conventional expectations about horseback activities serving tactical rather than spiritual purposes. The ceremony that initially appeared military actually represented ancient expression of human courage that honored warriors without requiring violence, demonstrating that indigenous values could expand rather than restrict warrior potential. When cultural organization prioritized spiritual honor over systematic military preparation that served tactical objectives through organized activities requiring strategic training for warfare against enemy populations. The traditions that honored courage more effectively than combat revealed that cultural understanding could overcome systematic militarism through observed warrior practices that demonstrated fundamental truths about human honor transcending tactical objectives while creating foundation for recognition that spiritual courage could serve warrior identity regardless of military classifications or strategic preparations. The horsemanship that celebrated rather than prepared for war demonstrated that warrior wisdom could exceed military doctrine when traditional practices provided alternatives to systematic violence, proving that authentic recognition of indigenous courage could transform understanding of warrior purpose while creating possibilities for cultural exchange that honored spiritual development over tactical preparation requiring systematic adherence to military objectives designed for warfare against populations whose essential warrior spirit transcended all earthly conflicts.